All right, let's get started. Hopefully the delay isn't too bad, but welcome to the Downtown ReactJS meetup. My name is Roberto. I am your host for tonight. We got two great presentations lined up for you. Just a quick rundown of what we got going on for you today. As we all know, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript isn't enough to make you an effective front-end developer. We also need to know about deploying and building with these tools, right? So our two speakers today will go more in details about deploying and building. So just make sure you add these two topics into your learning kits. Our first speaker will be Logan, who will go over deploying with Cloudflare Workers. And our second speaker, Zhang, will go over Plasmic, a visual React UI builder that he's been working on, him and his team. Before we get into the presentations, I would just like to share with you some really neat topics that have come to my attention from my hiatus of front-end development. Lately, I've been focusing more or less on DevOps kind of things, and a couple days ago, came back to the front-end development. And like most people, I kind of feel lost at the pace of how fast the front-end development flows. So I went through my old blog posts that I've saved as bookmarks, and I went through them just to get a refresher of what front-end development, especially with React, is. And I ran into one of my favorites is Mark Dev's blog. He's the author of the world famous Redux library. And he's very thorough on some of his stuff that he says. And so he goes through a very good guide on building or guide to rendering behavior in React. Highly recommend it as a refresher for anyone out there who's coming and going and needs to get caught up on some basics on how React renders. Another all-time favorite topic of front-end development is state management. Coming back into it, 2 hot new management libraries that were introduced to me is one called Recoil. I haven't used it, but just to let you know, front-end development does change. A lot of ideas are flowing. They never stop. If you're into testing and playing with React management libraries, Recoil, definitely check out Recoil. And another one here that claims to be your store for React. If you're not a fan of Redux or any of the major ones, MobX, these 2 stores, highly recommend you go through them and just play with them. And of course, when you're building any React application, messing around with CSS is always a pain. But this is a really good refresher on all the many types of CSS, the ways of CSS you can use into React that I highly recommend reading. Actually, I follow Robin Wright. He has a lot of good articles out there. And this one was a really good refresher on everything CSS. And then finally, if you're coming into React, one of the things that everyone in the new React world is talking about implementing is hooks. And so I sat down and watched this video a couple of days ago. If you're into this, trying to make your own custom hooks and looking for tips, Harry Wolf does a really good job on writing your own custom hook for like event listeners. Highly recommend it. That being said, the front-end development world is constantly changing. Trying to keep up with the whole front-end development is really challenging. If you have any good articles to post and share with the community, let me know, or just post them on the meetup. I'll definitely look into those, just because like I said, I've been doing a lot of DevOps the last couple of weeks, and just jumping back into front-end development. It's just incredible how fast things are changing. That being said, so going to the presentations today about deploying and building your own React UI. One thing about questions, let's just save our questions to the very end, and I think Logan and Yang will take care of them at the very end of the presentation. They'll go over your questions. With that being said, I think I can just hand it off to you, Logan, if you want to jump on in.
Yes, sounds good. Thanks, Roberto. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good time despite everything. I'm going to be talking about Cloudflare Workers here, as Roberto mentioned. So let me get it all loaded up here. First time using this Gypsy, so I think I might require a little bit of a learning curve, but we should be good. I'm just going to wait till my screen shows up. Unless Roberto, can you see it?
No, there's definitely a lag.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're good to go on this sharing before I start. Okay, yeah, all right. Cool. All right, as Roberto mentioned, we're gonna have the YouTube thing on a different, or behind the PowerPoint, so I won't be able to see your questions until the end. And frankly, I'm probably not the best person to answer your React questions. So hopefully we can kind of help each other if you do have some technical questions. But I'll do my best and follow up on any other questions that I'm unable to answer with you individually. So let's get started. My name is Logan Lindquist. I go by LLBBL, or it's pronounced Labibel everywhere. It's my initials. Don't ask me what my whole name is. Maybe over beer. I don't know why I have so many names. Feel free to ask my parents for that answer. But yep, I live here in Austin. I run a small business. We do consulting contract work. It's Legacy Beta. Maybe some of you have heard of that. Hopefully some of you have heard of that. But that's me. This is kind of under my personal brand here. So I'm not trying to sell anything or anything. It's not attached to the company stuff, or for the most part. So some things are. Anyways, this background image is brought to you by the wonderful PowerPoint AI. I wasn't first sure how it related to the topic, but then I imagined the people in the background are all serverless functions, and they're all working hard to release the big boiling pot of death that is your website. So I guess maybe it relates. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going with it. But yeah, the PowerPoint AI makes things a lot easier, and definitely check it out if you're doing presentations. All right, so why am I giving this presentation? March and April was a particularly difficult time, I think, for everybody, and we wanted to do something positive, to spread some positivity in the world. And so we started working on this side project. It took a couple weeks. It's called positive.help. And luckily the domain was available, so that's kind of what the branding is around. But it's a way to collect, positive messages and for people to submit them. And we open source the whole thing. It's on GitHub. You can check it out. Please check it out. It is under the Legacy Beta account there. Just it's easier to manage it as an org rather than my personal GitHub stuff. But yeah, mostly me and a few people from the dev team worked on it, but just a couple people, a couple weeks, and Gatsby was really awesome. I learned a lot, had a lot of fun learning Gatsby, and it was actually my first kind of opportunity to dive into React and figure out, a lot of this front end stuff. My background is more on back end languages and DevOps and management stuff. So it was a fun opportunity for me to get into it. Yeah, we announced it on April 20th. There you can see the blog post announcement. But the Cloudflare Workers, we ended up evaluating some different hosting providers, and I'm going to go into that. But this presentation is largely a byproduct of the research that I did into looking into the different hosting possibilities out there. The messages are stored as Markdown. And then using the GraphQL Markdown plugin in Gatsby, it generates the JSON or whatever is needed for React to build out the site. And the end result, it's really freaking fast on Cloudflare Workers. As you can see, it's 250, 300 milliseconds. I swear it was a lot less than that. It may have done something in the last, I upgraded Tailwind, and maybe that made it slower. I don't know, but 200 milliseconds is really freaking fast. So one thing annoying about Gatsby is that they do semver, and they seemingly release multiple versions of it a day. So if you're working in a Gatsby project and you're doing updates to it, and you try to do Gatsby develop or Gatsby build, then it complains like, hey, there's a new version. And that can happen multiple times a day. I don't know if it's just been more active recently than normal, but that was kind of one thing that has annoyed me a little bit about it. But other than that, really enjoyed learning Gatsby and React, and it's been a lot of fun. And as I kind of mentioned here, and you can see, while we're learning new things, why not learn a new front-end CSS framework? And so we did Tailwind CSS on it, and just finished upgrading it from the 0. whatever to, I think we're on 1.3. It's not the latest, but at least we got past the 1.0 release. And we have a lot of ideas for the site. We're definitely going to continue working on it as a side project. And yeah, let's get into it. So more about Cloudflare Worker CLI is all managed via this tool called Wrangler. Wrangler is written in Rust, and it can be installed via the Rust package manager Cargo, but you'll probably want to install it via NPM, and here's why. While Cargo is easy to install with brew install Rust command if you're on a Mac, and it prompts you at the end of that to add a .cargo to your path. If you're using MVM to manage your node versions locally, NVM takes over your path and adds its bin folder at the very beginning of your path, and that's going to override where your Wrangler is set up. So, which, by the way, is this like overriding is done if you ever look at your bash RC or ZSH RC is done on the nvm.sh line. If you're interested, there doesn't seem to be an easy way to move the NVM stuff to the end of the path. I haven't quite figured that out. But anyways, I don't know if that matters really. If that only really matters if you try to install it with NPM and Cargo, which I did, because I'm like, okay, well, let's try both methods and see how well it works. And yeah, that's just FYI. If you end up installing it with both methods, your NPM is probably going to override your Cargo. An easy way to tell which Wrangler you have installed on command line, you can type which Wrangler, and it'll tell you what the path is to the executable. So that's all you have to do to install Wrangler. Pretty easy. All right. So the Wrangler config stuff, it uses this TOML format. TOML stands for Tom's Obvious Minimal Language. It was created about 7 years ago, compared to YAML, which is about 13 years old. It looks very similar to YAML. It primarily exists as key value pairs, but I think it looks closer to like INI files. If you spent a lot of time looking at those, TOML format is very commonly used in Rust, and I think that's why it's used here. So you're going to want to run Wrangler init in the directory of the project that you want to deploy to Cloudflare Workers. And with the Cloudflare Workers, you can deploy different types of languages. If you're interested in doing other types, they have included different types depending on what you're looking to do with it. That mainly there is the type, the second line there, the type. But for our purposes, it's fine to go with the default, and it should say Webpack. So you can see below here, this first one is the sample one that they give you, and then you can see the one on the right is kind of also a sample, but that's kind of after you have configured it. Environments allow you to deploy the same project to multiple places in the Cloudflare Workers. On the command line, you can switch between the environments with this -env or -e parameters. But yeah, I think if you're just getting started, I would recommend not using environments. It's just complicates things. Yeah, so you don't have to do that if it's not a absolute requirement. So a little bit more about the config details, because that is important to get this thing working. So we're going to look up, have to look up a few things in the Cloudflare dashboard and add it to this Wrangler .toml file. The first one is this account ID. You see the third one down. The documentation says it's found in the dashboard. Without providing exact details, the easiest way to find it is actually on the overview page for the domain that you want to deploy to. If you go to the page for that domain and you scroll down a bit, you'll see it there on the right. The workers dev option here, the fourth line down, it is initially, I think, set to false, and then sorry, it's initially set to true, but you're going to want to set it to false when you're ready to push it out. And routes is the route that gets updated. You can find it in the Cloudflare dashboard. It gets updated on every deployment. Usually you have to set it once, and then you don't need to really mess with it much. This pattern that you see here, it works great for most stuff if you're deploying workers to like the site route. So it's pretty easy setting up the route there. And then the next thing that we'll have to find in the Cloudflare dashboard is the zone ID below that. And that is basically a unique identifier or a unique hash that is present in the Cloudflare network that points to your domain name in their systems. This zone ID is just a fake one, but that's what it looks like. And below that, these parameters, you'll see like the optional environments. I've included it here in case you want to use that. If you aren't going to use the environments, you still need to add this site section. So the bucket, if you're deploying a Gatsby project, bucket is the folder that you want to deploy to Cloudflare Workers. And then this entry point is where the worker script code lives in your Gatsby project. For a Gatsby or a React project, this is the code that communicates with the Cloudflare API. It's added to your project when you run the Wrangler init command. And it's safe to commit it. It's just JavaScript code. So you can configure all of these parameters by running the Wrangler config on the command line. But I think it's just much easier to pull up that initial toml file that it generates in whatever editor you like to use, and then modify them as you go. Yep. I recommend not committing this, so you'll have to update your git ignore. But the toml file, I think if you're obviously adding zone ID and account ID stuff, you're going to want to make sure that that file is not committed. It is possible to template that file, and that is, there's a couple deployment options that we'll get into here at the end of the presentation. But if, initial deployments, you don't have to worry about templating it. So you can always just, unignore it and then add the templated TOML file back to the code once you're ready to set up the CI/CD stuff. Okay, so Cloudflare Workers has two components to it. It has worker sites, and worker sites is just like the CPU portion of it. It out of the box, it runs JavaScript, Rust, C, C++, and it runs it on the edge. Under the hood, the Workers runtime uses the V8 engine, the same engine used by Chromium and Node. The Workers runtime also implements many of the standard APIs available in most modern browsers. The Workers functions run on the Cloudflare's edge network. So it's going to be running down the road, right, or maybe in Houston, wherever the Cloudflare local data center is. And it runs using this isolates model instead of virtual machines. And this allows them, everything's still isolated, it's in the name, but it allows them to run, these much smaller footprint functions, on the bare metal stuff that's in the Cloudflare data center. And the way that Cloudflare Worker sites, the billing is based on the number of requests that you handle instead of the compute time. The median compute for like 2 Gatsby projects, as you can see, the median compute time is like, you can see it in the Cloudflare dashboard. It's a couple of seconds. It's not that, doesn't take that long, and executes really fast. So because of how Worker sites is built, you can't store state here. Okay, well, great. How do I store state? And we're gonna get into that, but this article that is linked below is really interesting. I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in how they built this. That goes into some really interesting details. So the second component to Cloudflare Workers is Workers KV. That is a distributed key value store. It's really great. It's where you store everything. It's a namespace ID that it's generated, and then all the key values are under that namespace ID. A single namespace is large enough to hold all your static content for one Gatsby site. So you can put JavaScript, CSS, JSON, HTML, you can put images in them, everything you need to run your site, you can store in here. And you can view the namespaces on your account in the Cloudflare Workers dashboard. You can view and delete the keys and the values. You can manually add content to your namespace, all from the Cloudflare dashboard. So you have, the API on the command line, but you can also just go and see it, on a web page somewhere. So the combination of these two things, Worker sites and Workers KV, it makes it a really great for hosting static content. I think it's really great for APIs. I think you can do all sorts of things with it. And I'm really interested in doing more than just the static CMS stuff that we did for Gatsby, because it is really fast, and you're like, well, what's the catch? Well, the catch is that you have to pay Cloudflare in order to use Workers KV. Workers KV actually costs them money to store stuff. So it's only $5 per month and to get started. And here's the so $5 per month for their unlimited plan. And as in most things in life, unlimited is not really unlimited, but it's unlimited for the most, like almost every use case. I'm going to go into the details here of the exact unlimited stuff, but as you can see here, here's the CPU side of the service. They do set a 50 millisecond limit on the unlimited plan, the paid plan. This applies to the workers dev functions as well as any serverless applications you have running. Obviously, the main limiting factor here is that CPU execution time. So it's not going to be the best thing for running long jobs, long serverless applications, but 50 milliseconds is certainly fine for a lot of use cases, especially if you're breaking down your monolith into like much smaller little things. 50 milliseconds just to do something really basic is going to work just fine for you. But we're not here to talk about serverless. Maybe a little bit. I'm going to touch on it. But this project was built with Gatsby, or Hugo would also work great for it. Any sort of static site generator you have. Workers, Cloudflare Workers is a great opportunity for it. So the worker functions are triggered by API calls, similar to how you deal with Lambdas in AWS. You can't call them directly via your server-side code, like how you would with a Node or a Deno application. And how it compares to AWS, well, AWS charges you for everything. AWS charges for Lambda execution time. AWS charges you per request to the Lambdas. And then on top of that, AWS S3 and EFS EC2 outbound bandwidth at scale gets to be quite expensive. Lambdas sound cheap getting started, but at scale, because you're paying left and right for every possible thing, Lambdas end up being a great way to add some zeros to your AWS bill. So I think this is a good way to save a lot of money. Cloudflare doesn't charge you for bandwidth. However, there are some unpublished bandwidth limits from what I've heard. For almost every site that you build, the bandwidth included won't be an issue. Even if you go over the unpublished limits and end up having to upgrade to their next highest plan, it's going to be cheaper than AWS. A fixed rate bandwidth bill is always better than a variable rate bandwidth bill. So yeah. So that's kind of like on the CPU side of things. On storing stuff, there's also some limits on how much stuff you can put into it. This first line here is what's included with the unlimited plan. So you get 1 gigabyte of storage. You get 10 million reads per month, 1 million writes, 1 million deletes, 1 million lists, and then those are the rates if you go over. And so I would need to do a little bit more work in Excel to see how the storage pricing scales. I think they priced it this way because they don't want you to build another like image hosting site, like another imager. But you probably don't want to store a bunch of large binary data in Workers KV without a bit more like looking into the service. I'm guessing that you're better off if you're looking to store like terabytes of images. You probably want to put them somewhere else and then throw them, like a regular old CDN, like Fastly, or even like the normal Cloudflare CDN in front of your terabyte of images, terabytes of images. I think the Workers KV is not a good use case, is my guess, for storing like tons of binary data. So what else can they do? I kind of touched on it. They also support the serverless framework. So the serverless framework, in case you don't know, was originally built to run applications or functions in AWS Lambda. Since then, it has grown to include many different platforms, but not limited to Azure Cloud, Google Cloud, Knative, and now you can also do Cloudflare Workers. So the serverless framework is basically a Node.js wrapper that's written to communicate with all these different hosting APIs. And then within that wrapper, you can run all sorts of different application code. You can run PHP, you can run Ruby, Swift, Go, Python, Java, and of course JavaScript. And so so now you know kind of everything that Cloudflare Workers does. I want to get into kind of me evaluating these different hosting providers. And the first one is Netlify, Netty, I don't know how to say it. Netlify, I'm going to go with that. I'm sure you've heard of it. Everyone has probably heard of it at this point. It's that like deployed and Netlify button on GitHub that you're seeing everywhere. I think they've done a really good job of optimizing for the developer experience. I'm not super thrilled with their usage-based pricing here, but there you go. The serverless stuff that you can run serverless stuff on Netlify, but it's built separate, and it's not super cheap. All their serverless stuff runs on Lambdas, and you get less than you would if you just end up running your own AWS account with Lambdas in it. It might make sense, I guess, if you don't have like a DevOps person on staff. But if you can set up a serverless application and you don't know how to configure an AWS account to run Lambdas, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I was trying to think about this. How big is that market? I don't know. I'm guessing not that big, but it's a thing that they offer, so I'm sure somebody's paying for it. I haven't looked into it yet, but they built their own CDN, Netlify. I don't know if it's just another CDN that's been repackaged. Big CDN providers, you're going to want to look at, obviously, big fan of Cloudflare, but Fastly or Akamai are the two big ones. CDNs are not super cheap to build. I'm guessing Netlify is probably repackaging another provider's CDN. It could be fine, or it could be a disaster without like looking into the details. A disaster being if they actually did go build their own CDN. So I'm not a huge fan of the CloudFront as a CDN, so I'm hoping that it's not that. But who knows? So that's Netlify. I'm like, all right, well, cool. Seems good. The free plan is okay, but as you start paying for more, didn't make sense. So I'm like, all right, what else is there? So the next thing that I looked at was Zeet, or it's formerly known as Zeet. Now it's known as Vercel. And here's kind of their breakdown for their different plans. The hobby, pro, and enterprise plans. The free or hobby accounts only work with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket personal accounts. You must upgrade to pro for the organization level account there. They just landed a big round of funding. So if you can make it work with the hobby plan, I think it might make sense here to maybe to check out. They do serverless, so if you have a lot of serverless stuff, and hobby works for you just to kind of mess around with some serverless stuff, I think it makes sense. $20. So the pricing, it's based on the number of members within your organization. When you get to the pro, and it's $20 per month per member. So if you have a medium to large size organization on GitHub or GitLab, it's going to get expensive fast. But yeah, worth checking out for a lot of people, I think. So cool. I was like, all right, what's next? So the next thing that I looked at was Surge.sh. This was, when I was looking into this, was the first time that I heard about this. Maybe this is like a well-known thing in the React front end world, but it was a new thing for me. Seems really awesome. The free plan. I think they've done a really good job there, giving you a lot of things for free and making it super easier for the developer experience. It's really great for static sites. There's no publish limits on bandwidth or CPU server execution, but it doesn't do serverless functions. So if you want to get into a little bit more complicated kind of functions, this is not the thing for you. And to be honest, if you're evaluating the pro plan, I think Cloudflare Workers is better. So $30 a month there on the pro plan on the Cloudflare Workers will get you 50 million reads per month. That's a lot. And that's on the edge, right? Like 50 million reads. So, and I don't know how well this Surge scales beyond 50 million reads per month. Like, is it really going to support 100 million, 500 million? Because I know Cloudflare does. So I think if you need something and that needs to scale, Cloudflare is going to be better. So it has good reviews. Definitely check that out if you haven't already. It was pretty cool. So those were all the ones I looked at, and I'm like, all right, well, $5 a month, Cloudflare Workers, 10 million reads. I can store a gigabyte. I can store a ton of stuff in there. Obviously, I ended up deciding on Cloudflare Workers, and have been happy with that decision. Deploying is really easy. Once you get that TOML set up, it's just Wrangler publish, and your site is updated. It's really easy. So the one thing with the Cloudflare Workers, the kind of the gotcha as I was building it, like the final step, that took a little bit of time for me to figure out was, I'm like, all right, I guess I haven't mentioned it, but so Cloudflare Workers, the workers.dev is the subdomain, and then when you're getting it set up, you pick your own subdomain off that workers.dev. So it's like company name.workers.dev, and then your application is another subdomain. So it's like application.companyname.workers.dev, right? That's kind of how it works. So at this point, I'm like, all right, everything's published. I can see it on my subdomain that I picked for positive.health. I think you can find it, based on if you know the site name and the company name, you know what I picked, right? But I'm like, all right, how do I point it to positive.help, right? And I went back through the documentation. It's not super obvious, but I tried a few things. I tried a CNAME to the worker subdomain. That didn't work. I was going to add an A record to these worker things, but the workers don't have an IP address. So I'm like, okay, well, how do I get this to work? And it's in there, and you just add a dummy A record with a fake IP. 1234 works fine, and then you just make sure that the Cloudflare orange cloud is turned on, which means that your requests are being routed through the Cloudflare network. Obvious thing, but sometimes I think when you add a new record, by default that's on. So by default it should be fine. The orange cloud should be fine. But yeah, that's all you got to do is add that DNS record, and then 2 to 5 minutes later, your site's working. Super easy. Wrangler publish after all that stuff set up, and you have a new version of the site. I meant to template my Wrangler file, and I've been intending to get it working under GitHub Actions. But I had to write the presentation, and I ended up upgrading Tailwind that took longer than normal. So long story short is I didn't get around to actually templating that TOML file, but there's examples out there. It's pretty easy to do. I am 100% confident that another couple hours I can get it working under one of these things. We have GitLab. The site is on GitHub, and JetBrains, TeamCity, or Jenkins. I think would all work. All of those would work great, and it's super easy to do once you get the TOML file templated. And yeah, basically all you have to do to get working on these is there's a few steps. You need to configure your deployment environment to run Wrangler. So kind of go through the install commands, figure out what's going to be the easiest thing to configure Wrangler or install Wrangler on, or look at positive.help in about a week, or maybe don't hold me to that, but we'll get it there sometime soon. But get your deployment running Wrangler. The second thing is you have to parameterize the Wrangler TOML file, like I mentioned. And the third thing is you just have to add those secrets that was in the Wrangler.toml file to whatever GUI CI/CD thing that you're decided to use. Step one obviously is going to be the hardest. In the past, we've used GitLab runners, and they've worked well. And what we've done is we've built custom Docker deployment images with the necessary dependencies in the Docker image, and that simplifies the YAML file quite a bit. So yeah, that's it. I highly recommend Cloudflare Workers. I hope you learned something. Please don't ask me any React questions. I am just getting started with React, and this is my adventure into the front end dev side of things. But yeah, let me pull up the questions here.
Thanks, Logan. That one quick question. Would you use Cloudflare KV for your authentications / sessions? Do you think that would help rather than making the round trip back to the server for every I guess auth call? Or do you see somebody or something using a JWT for your KV sessions? Is that viable?
I think it's probably viable. I know they've built some services with the Cloudflare Workers that is authentication focused. Like Cloudflare has these products, and they do mention in the documentation that authentication is one of the use cases, like storing authentication state in Workers KV. So yeah, I think it's a good use case. I just don't know, getting the JWT stuff set up. It is complicated no matter where you do it, and it might be easier to like do it first, like on an EC2, and then like, okay, great, it's working now. Let's try it in Workers. That's kind of how I would approach it.
About it, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you can store all sorts of things in Workers KV, and authentication is definitely possible.
Good to know.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, and yeah. So if anybody has any like positive messages or thinks of something, go visit the website. There's a button in the upper right. Feel free to suggest something. You can obviously check it out on GitHub, and there's a link to that as well. And you can take a look at our horrible React code, and if you have any suggestions or want to help, we're happy to take pull requests, merge requests, whatever they're called. Yeah, so thank you, Roberto, for letting me speak. I hope it was a good one. I haven't done, this is my first React talk, so hopefully it went all right.
Well, I mean, deployment is one of those things that, even just trying to do one-offs real quick, design has some weird functionality or some weird product, and you just want to do a quick run-off.
Yeah.
I usually use Surge just because it's super easy to like npm build and then just deploy the build folder and you're done. So
yep.
Learning these simple hacks is, I think, extremely viable just to increase your productivity.
Yeah, so with Surge, what is the command to publish something on Surge?
I think it's just Surge.
Okay.
Surge, and then the file name or the directory name.
Or the directory, yeah.
And if you have a custom domain, you put that there as well. But
it seemed pretty easy, like from their website and the documentation and whatnot. It's a very similar deployment process for Wrangler. Once you have it configured, it's just Gatsby build, or it's essentially like npm build, and then Wrangler publish. So it's just a two-step thing to get it published once you have everything configured, and it's super easy. Just looking up the getting the TOML thing configured was the hardest part, I think. So, yep.
Cool. If there's any,
I'll stop my
more questions here. Yeah, if there's no more questions, Yang, you want to take it away?
Yeah, awesome. Let's see. Can you guys see me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks for making time and checking out this talk. So I'm going to be talking about Plasmic, which is basically a visual React UI builder that I have been hacking on with a group of friends of mine. And basically, the way we got here is mainly from our experiences on product teams. What we've seen a lot is when you have a team of designers and developers working together, there's a lot of basically this collaboration that happens during the handoff process, especially, but also just throughout the design phase and whatnot. And basically what we've seen is, designers, they are spending a lot of time creating these very high fidelity vector drawings in these drawing tools like Sketch and Figma. And these tools don't really help them directly today in sort of understanding how the target medium works, or making sure they're properly using the design system, or trying to think through all the different states. And so they're kind of left to fend for themselves on these things. And then developers at some point are then tasked with recreating the intent of the designer from scratch by hand using code, dealing with CSS layout and whatnot, and inevitably, a ton of things fall through the cracks in this process. So you just have a lot of back and forth, but you ultimately end up with these two sources of truth on these product teams that are things you have to maintain, but are never, actually in sync from what we've seen. So, basically that's the pain point that Plasmic was born out of. Was thinking, okay, is there a way to bridge this gap? So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it was just selfishly, having worked on front ends for a long time, having used React for a long time, you constantly see this turn in frameworks for styling and layout and design systems and token systems, and there's just all this activity and invention and reinvention, which is awesome to see in the front end world around these frameworks. But that I think is a mirror, or it reflects this this search that a lot of front end developers have for finding a better way to build front ends, a better way to express very rapidly and easily but systematically the kind of front ends that you want to build, factoring complexities like responsive layout and whatnot. So so the other aspect of Plasmic was just selfishly wanting a better developer experience for crafting these, what is essentially a very visual thing, right? And something that we thought could feel natural through direct manipulation as opposed to symbolic manipulation, just through code. So Plasmic is basically a combination of these thoughts into a tool that is, for very much for developers. So it's similar on the surface to one of these drawing tools like Sketch or Figma, but it lets you create real things, and it translates that into code. And not just as like a one-time code generation process or anything like that, but continually as you're iterating on the product. So and continually as you have added in like your real logic and state and behavior. That's really the workflow that we're trying to enable for developers. Is you create the presentational, essentially a presentational component in this visual builder, and then all the logic and state and event handlers and that kind of stuff you're wiring up in your normal sort of code editor, where you have the luxury of things like TypeScript and types, or even if you're not using TypeScript, your current way of doing things, your existing state management, et cetera. So we're not trying to like reinvent coding or something like that. This is just for the presentational aspects, and then all the logic is still stuff that you're doing from code. So that is very high level overview. So the idea here is really to keep design and development on the same page with a single source of truth, where we can really enable them to, especially developers, to just spend less time iterating on presentational tweaks, focus on the technical problems. But even if you are a developer who is in the driver's seat using this thing, we're hoping to make that experience of crafting these front ends much more rapid feedback than sitting there trying to think about what flex basis you want while you are waiting for your hot reload cycle to work, and hopefully it doesn't blow away your state, et cetera. So or like iterating in Storybook, trying to set up visual regression tests to make sure you're not screwing up your presentational layer. So there's basically this whole class of bugs and QAing and tooling and workflows that we're also hoping that this can sort of sidestep as a result. So with that, I'm gonna just give a very simple demo of the tool used for building a to-do app, our favorite one, to-do MVC. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. Is that coming through? Is my screen being shared?
No,
Sorry.
not yet. It's like, it's not your screen. I don't know what it is.
That is weird.
Trying to load or something.
Well, let me try this one more time. Any luck?
It's just like
No.
a gray thing, and it's got like a monitor. It's got the same icon that you in Jitsi that you share your screen with.
That's bizarre. Okay, let's see. I tried sharing my whole screen, but maybe try reloading, seeing if this works. Oops.
Yeah, I think it's working now.
Oh, great.
You're on twice, right? I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. I'm glad it works. Okay, so this is the tool. Just a simple dashboard where you kind of see all your projects. I'm gonna, for this demo, I'll kind of go through this exercise of building like a to-do MVC. And in case you're not familiar, to-do MVC is just one of these really popular example apps that has a lot of reference steps already implemented for, so you can kind of take a look at what this thing is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to behave, etc. We're not going to create the whole thing in this. We're just going to create a rough, very simple approximation of this in the design tool. So yeah, basically, back here, I'm going to call this my to-do demo. You have this kind of canvas that's empty to start out with. And basically, you can start creating things just within these, what are called artboards, these screens. And the workflow that we wanted to enable for you is to be able to start out with even like very rough, quick and dirty sort of exploratory mocks or designs, and then be able to refine that from there into something that is like robust, has real layout, et cetera. So that you don't have to like, so it's not, doesn't feel like just coding, but visually and thinking of strict, rigid hierarchy and structure and things like that. Just letting you start off with very sloppy design. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to start by creating like the title of this app called To Do's. I'll kind of put it up there and I'll make it larger and maybe even larger, and I'll make it thin, give it this sort of light reddish look. And the idea is to really give you a bunch of like free-form drawing and styling tools available so that you can just, slap things on the screen. And below the title, I'm just going to create my first, yeah. So before the, how should I do this? Actually, I'll just go ahead and create this, this first task here right below the title. So this task card is supposed to be white, but our background, the whole page is white. So I'm going to set the background of the whole page to be this off-white, warm gray. And maybe I'll tweak that a little bit as well, just make it a little bit darker. So you can get this very rapid, visual feedback as you're creating your design and creating the front end without, having to pull up your inspector and dev tools and like tweak the values, copy the value back into your code base, et cetera. Just trying to make it like very fast and fluid. Let's iterate on your design. So this card itself, I'm going to actually set it to be a pure white, solid white. And inside of it, I'm going to just draw my sort of checkbox, which is this circular checkbox. I'm going to give it a border radius of 50%, make it very lightly bordered. I'll remove the background, actually, entirely. And so you can kind of see this is our checkbox here. And within this task, I also want the task itself, the text of the task. So maybe buy some milk. OK, so I'm going to tweak this typography here a little bit, make it a little larger, make it a little bit lighter. And this text color, maybe I want to reuse this text color in a bunch of different places, right? I don't just want to hard code these one-off values everywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this. I'm going to define it as a color token called text color. And the idea of tokens, including color tokens, but also different types of tokens like spacing tokens, et cetera, is to enable you to have these like very simple values that you can reuse throughout your design. So like text color is one thing. You have like a primary accent color, you have like a standard background color, a light, light highlight color, et cetera. So you can save these all as tokens and then reuse them. And if you update them, then you get all the components reflecting those changes as well. So, kind of the things that you might be used to if you're writing code in like Sass or, using CSS conference properties or something like that, but within this tool itself. And the idea is really to give you like a very rich set of abstractions to work with, because at the end of the day, you are building the real thing. It has to be maintainable. And so, yeah. Let's see. So that is pretty much it for my task card. It's pretty simple. What I'm going to do is, because I want not just one of these, I want a bunch of them, I'm going to right-click this and create a component out of it. So I'm going to call this task. And so now that I have this task component, I'm going to duplicate it a bunch of times, just instantiating it a few times. These are all just instances of the task component. So if I make a change to one of them, if I double-click into the component, I'm basically editing the master copy of this component. And I adjust it around. You can see all the updates going to all the copies, all the instances, I should say. Again, just key abstractions like that. So now that I have this set of tasks, I just kind of roughly arrange them vertically. But what I want is for there to be a real layout, right? I want to like manually pixel push things everywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lasso these into a vertical stack. And what these vertical stacks do is they're basically flexblocks, similar to flexblocks. You can think of it as like flexblocks. What that means is that if I add more things into this list, I reorder things, you can see everything is kept arranged in the way you specify. And you can specify a lot of different particular arrangements of things. So for instance, I can snap everything to the top, everything to the left. I can also double-click these edges to make things auto-size to the content. So double-click to size vertically, and maybe I also want to do that horizontally. So just giving you a lot of like very fine-grained control over the layout. And also, I'm just going to remove that background color. I know that it's there from before. So we have this very simple layout for this task list. I'm just going to call this thing task list. And naming elements helps you keep your design organized, but also it'll come in handy later for the actual code gen part. So this is our basic task list, and the layout options that I showed so far, these are like pretty simple. We'll see some more advanced layout features in a little bit. Now I have these 3 tasks, but I'm just creating like a rough mock-up of what my to-do app should look like, right? And I want a slightly more interesting mock-up than 3 of the exact same task. I want the text to actually vary. And indeed, in the real app, I'm going to want that content to be completely dynamic, right? So in order to do that, in order to make the text different, one thing we'll do first is I'll double-click back into this component to edit it. And what I can do is I can right-click this text and say convert it to a slot. And what that does is slots are basically like poking a hole in the component, so that from outside of the component, from any one of these instances, I can select that slot and just directly manipulate it. So that's something I do is just change the text in the slot to be like, make to-do app, show a demo, etc. But slots are actually quite expressive, so you can besides just changing the text, you can also drop in any other stuff that you want in there, other components, other elements, etc. So it's almost like you can think of it like the children prop. In fact, we call it children by default. So that's how you can achieve component composition in a pretty simple way. And then the last thing I want to do for my to-do app is I want to design the tasks in all of their different states, because these are all like incomplete tasks. What does a completed task look like? Or what does a task look like when it's being edited? What does a task look like when it's marked high priority or some other feature you might have? So in order to do that, the first thing I'll do is, I could keep just like double clicking into this component to edit it here in place, which can be nice if you just want to design things directly in context. But you can also actually just right click this component to pop it out into its own new artboard on the side. So you can see that there's basically this concept of artboards is basically like a view into things. So we have this complete separation of the objects and the views. So you can have as many views as you want for these tasks, and we'll see that coming in handy in a little bit. But now, if I in this component, I want to design it out in its different states. The way we express that in Plasmic is through this concept of variants. So, for instance, I'm going to create a new group of variants called states, and I'm going to create one variant called. Let's say I want to design what this thing looks like in it when it's completed, or when it's being edited, or when it's marked high priority, etc. So you can switch between these different states and just directly manipulate things to, define what it looks like in that state. And all those manipulations will be recorded as specific overrides on top of the base appearance of the component. So to make this more concrete, I'm just gonna design out the completed state. I'm not gonna go through all these different states and design all of them. But the completed state, like maybe what I want is, I like this check mark from the official sort of app. So I'm just going to screen grab this real briefly. Oh, actually, I think that copies the green highlight from my mouse click. So I'm going to turn that off. And I'll do that one more time. This time, hopefully, without the green highlight. And great. So back here, I can just paste that in. And it's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to zoom in to a pixel level. We have this like convenient little pixel grid. And now I'm going to zoom back out. And so that's kind of what my completed task looked like. I can switch between my completed and my base appearance to see what the difference is so far. Or I can actually just duplicate this whole artboard. And I'm going to like put it down below the first one. And I'll switch this back into the base appearance. So you can kind of see, the base appearance and the completed appearance side by side. Maybe another change I want to make for the completed appearance is I just want that text to be strikeout and maybe a lighter color instead of the standard text color. So I'll do that. Maybe I'll also save this as a reusable token called disabled text color. And so yeah, so these are my two variations of this component so far. But the thing about variants is that you can combine them dynamically, a bunch of them at a time. So what I mean by that is, for instance, let's say I wanted a hover state for this component, where every time I hover over any part of the component, I want this circle, this checkbox to become darker. So I can do that by basically defining another variant. This one I'll create as a special, what we call an interaction variant, for which we support certain special like UI states like hover and press, and things like that. So I'm going to design the hover state, and for the hover state, I just want this circle to be darker. So make it darker, and now I can actually try this out in this live preview mode. So I'm going to switch to live preview, and I'm just going to move my mouse over this thing, so you can see that it gives me the effect I want. But I noticed like another thing I want is for the cursor to change as well. So I'm going to switch that as well. Just select this thing and set the cursor to be pointer. And if I try that again, okay, that feels better. That feels more like what I want. So the thing about these variants is that they come with your component. They're part of your component. So they you can invoke them anywhere you have instances of the component. So back in my main app, what that means is I can take one of these, maybe this middle one, and I can simply select the state that I want from the right-hand panel. Like I want this to be completed, and I can also preview this whole thing and kind of move my mouse over these things. And again, the effects are coming with it. It's a little subtle, but you can notice that this for this middle one, we're actually dynamically combining the hover state with the completed state for that. So this is because all the changes that you make when you're editing a variant are recorded as basically diffs or like overrides on top of the base appearance. So you can control like the order of things, etc. So just giving you a lot of like very fine-grained control over exactly how things look and feel, because ultimately this is for creating the production UI, right? So you have to be able to express all the nuances and all the details. Let's see. So that's pretty much it for this to-do app that I wanted to design out visually. I can also, add some. The last thing I'll do is I'll just make this into a real layout, and because I've been sort of positioning everything absolutely so far, and so there's this hotkey you can press, Shift-A, which basically turns on auto layout on any container, and you can actually tweak that further. So I want everything to be centered again. I want everything to be top aligned, but I want there to be some padding on the top and bottom here, maybe like 32 pixels of padding, or maybe 64. And I also want there to be a gap in between them. So gap is just like this nice convenience feature that we've added on top of Flexbox. So it's just very commonly used, very common use case for Flexbox that you kind of have to hack around in CSS today. So, okay, anyway, that was pretty much it for our to-do app. And I'm gonna just save that whole screen as a component as well, called to-do app. And that's it. That's our two components. And now is kind of when the magic happens, and we want to actually work with this from the code. So to show that, I have this React app running. You can kind of see it running. It's just an empty sort of React app. And in order to get started with a Plasmic project in your React app, you basically, it's pretty simple. You just run Plasmic init. Whoops, that was not simple. Let's see. That's weird. I don't know what that means. Sorry, let me think. Well, that was bizarre. I don't know why that happened, but I'm glad it was not an issue. So anyway, you're in Plasmic init, and it just does some basic setup. It adds a plasmic.json file into your project directory, and that's kind of where it keeps track of the state of all your synced components. And now, after you've done that, you can run plasmic sync projects, and then paste in the project ID that you care about. So this project ID, I'm going to paste it back into my terminal, and it should sync down the two components that we created, the task and the to-do app. So yeah, here we go. Those are the files that we get. And basically what's going on here is, if I run git status, you can see created this Plasmic JSON. It created these two component files, the task and the to-do app. And it also creates this file of tokens in case you use one of these token managers like Salesforce Theo or Diz or one of these token managers, but you can ignore it. And lastly, there's a source Plasmic directory, and this is kind of like a place where we actually put the actual CSS and JSX for these presentational components. So to show you how this works, I'm going to pull up my code editor, and in the code editor, I can just look at, for instance, the to-do app itself. It's really simple. It just all it does is it renders the presentational component, this thing called the Plasmic to-do app. So you've got your to-do app shell component. This is something that you own as a developer. Like, you can make whatever changes you want to this file. We just kind of generate it almost more as a convenience for you, so that you have a starting point. And you can just go in here and add whatever hooks you want. You can completely change this file from a functional component to a class-based component. You can make some violent changes. You can even make it not render the Plasmic to-do app at all, and you can make it render some other component that already exists in your code base, whatever you want to do. And then Plasmic to-do app is what is actually the presentational component. And you can take a look in here. It's basically, you know, the real JSX tree and also the CSS. So actually, I'll show you the CSS as well. Basically, you know, these are the things that you don't have to worry about as a developer. And this is kind of stuff that's taken care of for you. So back in the to-do app, maybe what I want to do for this demo is I'm just going to change all this standard create React app boilerplate to render. I'm going to replace all this with just rendering the to-do app. So, oh, that did not autocomplete. There we go. So I'll save that. And hopefully, after some time, this will reload, maybe. Is this hot reload working? Oh, it's still working. It's pretty slow. OK, there we go. So it's exactly what we kind of created in the design tool, but you know, pixel perfect, and we didn't have to really do anything. We got it for free. Now, of course, as a developer, you want to make this come to life and wire up to real data, etc. So I'll show you how we can replace, for instance, this list of static things with a real dynamic list. And to do that, I'm going to go back into my to-do app component. Here, let's say your data came from some state. And let's say we're just using, I'm going to get rid of this typing indicator here. Use state, and maybe I just hard code for now, like a list of tasks, like do stuff is my first task, do more stuff is my second task, and do even more stuff with my third task. And now from this presentational component, you can specify overrides on props within that component, on elements within that component. So for instance, I want to change that task list, which remember we defined the name for that layer earlier. So this is how you can reference it. We want to change the contents of that task list to be just reflecting this data that we have. So rendering all the tasks. And for this, I'm going to use the other component that we emitted from Plasmic, which is the task component. And I'll pass in the task name as the children. So now if I save, we should see the, yeah, so this is now reflecting your actual data, for instance. And you know, you can keep attaching whatever props you want to any elements you want in any component. So like you can, you know, wire up more state and more event handlers and things like that. So this is the high level flow of how you can make your designs come to life. But you know, I think the real power of this thing is that it is not just a one-time eject from Plasmic. You can go back into the design tool specifically. And for instance, let's say we wanted to completely change the layout of this app from this vertical list to be something more like tile-based. So I'll show you how I can do that. I'm going to get rid of all these tasks. So I just have one instance of this that I'm working with. And what I'll do is I will actually just from here, I'm going to manipulate it from here. I'm going to make it more like a boxy tile look. So something like this. And I'm also going to turn on auto layout for this thing so that text can actually wrap around. And I'll pop this check box out of its auto layout position and make it free floating within this task box so that I can move it down to the bottom right, like so. And for this text box itself, I'm just going to add some padding, a little bit of padding around. And that's pretty much it. That's my new rendition of a task. And of course, if I now duplicate this a bunch of times, and I'm going to make this larger, but if I now duplicate this task a bunch of times, I still get that vertical list that I had before. What I want is for this to be more of like a grid layout. So I'm going to switch this to be a row-based layout. But now, of course, everything is overflowing the edge of the screen. So I'm going to also turn on wrapping. Now I have something that resembles more closely what I want, but I can't tell the borders apart from these different tasks. So I'm also going to add some gap in between things, like a row gap on the vertical axis, maybe also a column gap on the horizontal axis. So yeah, again, you can see kind of some of the layout features in play, and it's just really easy to make dramatic changes to your design. So now I have this updated look and feel, and maybe also change the font size of this whole thing to be 72. And yeah, so now, actually, if I run Plasmic sync again, then it should pull down the new latest presentational components. And I should be able to see that reflected in the running React app as well. So just trying to make it really easy for you to make these visual changes to your React app, while still very much you're using React and all your usual coding tools for the logic, etc. And then I think where we want to get to with this thing is that now that you've created this design in the visual builder, at this point, if the designer wants to make more changes, or if there is a designer that you work with and they want to iterate on the presentation, they can actually just do that and submit that to you as like a request, and you can just pull down the latest presentational components. If it's purely presentational changes, you might not have to do anything on the coding side and just push that through. So that's kind of the workflow that we hope to enable. But before they get to that point, we want to make sure that this works well as a tool for developers, and is something that can like really accelerate your own getting in the flow of crafting these the presentational layer of things. Yeah, so I think that was pretty much it for the demo I wanted to run through. But I'm going to stop there and first. I guess the last thing I want to say is that it's still really early for us. But the reason I wanted to share this tool is because we are just starting to open it up a little bit and get feedback from other teams. We've actually been doing private alpha so far, but certainly anyone in this group in this meetup is certainly welcome to play with this thing and kick the tires. We would love to get your feedback. I mean, that's the main thing we would ask for, is just your willingness to engage us with feedback. So yeah, I think I'll post a link to the YouTube channel right after this. It's pretty simple. It's just plasmic.app/signup. And yeah, you can try us out there. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions on anything.
Thanks, Zhang. Yang, that's pretty awesome. The application is pretty awesome. I have one question. So is this step, how do you see this as a for production usage? When you do the Plasmic init and you look at the code, it's not uglified, it's not minified. Is this a step before the build, like the official build, or is Plasmic going to help take care of that build as well? Or are you going to like or do I have to use two command lines? One's the Plasmic command line, and then the, I guess, npm build command line?
Yeah, good question. So these files are still going through your normal pipeline for processing code. So if you are getting it bundled ultimately at the end of the day, or anything like that, it's still going through. These are just like TSX and CSS files that are still going through the same process. And yeah, like the code I showed is it's where we are right now in terms of the code gen, and we're definitely trying to improve that more and get it even slimmer and more like simplified. But that's actually pretty low hanging fruit for us. So we should just do that. But we just haven't focused on optimizing just yet. So yeah, if you sorry, so to circle back to one part of your question, yeah, if you are bundling this using Webpack and you have minification settings for your production build, etc., it's all going through the same process.
Cool.
Okay.
How do you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the one question that I had was, it really cool, Yang. Appreciate the presentation. And I noticed like this page builder UI component stuff on the right hand side of Plasmic. I was looking at like open source page builder stuff a while back, and I noticed that there wasn't really any good anything available. I'm wondering if you found something out there that's easy, if you're kind of wanting to integrate a page builder component into an application that you're building, is there anything you would recommend, or did you guys, I'm assuming, did you have to end up building all that yourself? How hard was that? That's maybe like a two-parter there, but yeah.
Yeah, great question. So a lot of this was just created from scratch by us. I think we also looked into page builders and things like that, but ultimately it's just there's so many details to get right in building a tool like this that it was just simpler for us to really own it and create it from the ground up. But I think it would be cool to see if there is eventually one day like something that is
just like open source repo with a bunch of different little page builder components that you can easily add to whatever. That's a great idea for a project. If anybody wants to do something, that would be awesome. But yeah, cool.
Do you think this kind of falls in the same category to Logan's question? If you working on an application, you have multiple pages, so you probably need some kind of router. But does this kind of like dump those files in that respect, or is this something that developer has to come in and kind of reshuffle his files in order to make it fit with the design or the task or the design docs?
Yeah, so if you want to add some routing infrastructure to your app or any other sort of front-end infrastructure, you can do that. These are just components that you can almost think of it as pulling in like a dependency into your NPM from NPM, or like a component library from somewhere. Like if you're pulling in Ant or Material UI or one of these component libraries, you can just use the components in your app. It's not like taking over anything. So I can show you more concretely, in the code. Like for instance, if in your app you are actually wrapping this thing in a bunch of like React router stuff, for instance, router or route, I think is what it's called. I don't actually have React router installed right now, but like you're just using these components like normal components, so you can embellish them however you want.
What do you think would be, so how do you see this like going into like a dev shop, for example? Is this something that is being introduced or trying to get advocated to the designers, or is this trying to like cut between the, like, hey, developers, introduce it to your designers? Or I mean, like, what's the angle here that you're trying to get adopt, or like an angle for adoption, I suppose? Because
yeah, yeah, really good question. I mean, I think we are really focusing a lot on developers right now because at the end of the day, I think there's just a big gap in tooling for actually building production UIs. And it's just our own pain that we wanted to scratch. So yeah, first and foremost, really focusing on developers. But eventually, we've been trying to keep the tool itself approachable to non-technical users and designers. And eventually, I think longer term, we would love to basically invite other users to come in and manipulate those components visually, the presentational aspects in this tool, so that, or even create them from scratch in this tool, so that this whole like a set of presentational concerns can be lifted.
cool.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ying, and thanks, Logan. If there's no more questions, I I think we're done here. I appreciate everyone for joining us today. Hopefully by next month, we'll have a actual location, a spot, depending on how things go. But other than that, stay safe, everyone. We'll see you next week or next month.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.